Hello, welcome to the Sideboard here at the StarCityGames.com Season 3 Invitational in Atlanta, part of the SCG Tour, brought to you by Ultimate Guard. I'm Nick Miller alongside one of my favorite Invitational deck tech partners, AJ Kerrigan. How you doing?
Happy birthday, Nick.
Oh, I appreciate that, thank you. Someone's been checking their Facebook statuses.
Yeah, what else do I do between rounds?
But you got a nice one here. I can always count on you for some sort of off-the-wall deck, and you're playing a standard Temur Energy deck. Notable, this is not like the combo Pummeler build.
Correct, yeah. This is, so you're not Aetherworks Marvel and you're not Pummeler. You're kind of this like mid-range aggressive deck that you can kind of shift roles depending on the matchup you're playing against, but you have a lot of the otherwise like red-green combo energy shell there.
Right, so we got the things you kind of expect when you see the energy decks. You've got Attune with Ether, you've got Servant of the Conduit, Harness Lightning. Those are the cards you expect to see. Then you kind of got a mix between like beatdown, but also the sort of control element, or I guess you would call it mid-range. But you have Big Hydra here. This is what I like, and this was one of the cards that kind of is very good in the beatdown build, or if you want to attack.
Yeah, I mean, he just does everything. Sometimes there's like some matchups where he gets a little big raw, but for the most part, you can make him bigger than any other creature. It's incredibly hard for decks to kill him, especially if you're making sure you're always keeping enough energy. And also just like a lot of times just coming to play and generating 3 energy, even if they kill him, that's good enough with a lot of the other engines in your deck too. The only downside to Bristling Hydra in this format is he's really bad against Spellcaller, but I think he's just really good against almost everything else. So.
Right. But your deck actually has quite a few ways to deal with Spellqueller, which is something some of the beatdown decks don't really have access to. Not only do you have Harness Lightning, but you also have Incendiary Flow, a card that doesn't see as much play as I think it should kind of have, especially with, you know, Scrap Heap Scroungers and things like that running around.
Yeah, so the big problem I think people stay away from Flow is because it doesn't kill Copter and it doesn't kill Avacyn and it doesn't kill Ishkana. But a lot of times you have like these 1/1s and 2/2s that you can trade up using Incendiary Flow. It's really good at killing Planeswalkers. It's amazing at killing Spellqueller, which is like its biggest application. Sometimes it'll activate Copters on your turn to block. You do a lot of baiting by attacking with a Thopter that you know is not going to survive, but the point is to bait them into playing something that you can then flow on your turn, or like activating their Copters. Yeah. So it does that really well too.
Them thinking, oh, I got you with this block here, we're going to loot, and then you just kill it.
Yeah, and a lot of time when the gas starts to run out against the more controlling decks where flow's not as good, you sometimes have 2 and you can just deal 6 to them, and that's really, really good.
Right, being able to go to the face is pretty important because you can definitely get some momentum going with your beatdowns here. You have Long Tusk Cub and Tireless Tracker, which can get out of control really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing about Long Tusk Cub is he's not that great of a creature, but if he's able to connect once and if they can't answer him, he's really good. And you have enough ways that you can make him a 3/3 or a 4/4 when you're attacking with him on turn 3, because you have Virtuoso and Attune and Harness Lightning to make extra energy. So that gets past a lot of the bigger creatures in the format that are in play on turn 2 and 3, like other trackers or Grim Flayers. So it's really easy to connect with him in this deck, especially because you have so many removal spells. And when you can start connecting with him consistently, he's just such a powerful engine, really.
Sure. Now, I notice you have the Virtuoso here. No Voltaic Brawler, but we're going to kind of the Thopter route, or like the more mid-range route with this instead of because you have Cub and you have, you know, Conduit, but you don't have the Brawler.
Yeah, so the point of playing this deck over like the red-green combo energy deck is you can take a control role, or you can take this more slower mid-range grindy role when you need to, and that's where Virtuoso is great and Brawler is not so good. Brawler's fine, he attacks for 4, like no big deal, but he doesn't do anything against a lot of cards in the format. And he kind of forces you to be a very aggressive deck. Whereas Virtuoso is not as aggressive as Voltaic Brawler, but it can put out a similar amount of damage. Plus, evasive damage is really important. Flying is very good. And the flying blockers are really important. And he's just a good way to generate more energy on turn 3 when you're trying to make sure your Hydra is going to survive when you play it on turn 4.
Right.
He just does a lot of things really well in this deck. There's a lot of matchups where he doesn't shine as much, but even in those matchups, like a 2/3 for 3 that makes 3 energy is still very good, especially in game 1.
All right. Now you're generating all this energy. You don't have the Pummeler to combo off, but we got to talk about this card. 3 copies, Confiscation Coup. This seems crazy.
Yeah, so Confiscation Coup is the card that you try to have in your main deck that's good against everything. We board it out a lot, admittedly, especially post-board when they know it's coming. They're able to play around it a little bit more. But it really just helps deal with a large swath of the problem creatures that if you're playing individual cards in those slots wouldn't deal with all of them. So you can bait out Avacyns and take Avacyns, which is very good.
Yeah.
You can take Aetherworks Marvel. A lot of times they miss on the first spin, but it's the second or third one that gets them there. You have enough energy, you can start activating Aetherworks Marvel. You can take Ishkana, which makes their Ishkana much worse, because if you get the 3/5 and they don't, and they just have 1/2s, you're able to pretty easily attack past 1/2s. It's the 3/5 that matters.
Sure.
So it really, it's just to cover all of the problem cards. And then post-board, we get to board in more specific answers, and that's where Coup starts to lose a lot of its value in certain matchup. So a lot of times you board down to like one post-board.
Yeah, it's important you mention that because, outside of just racing the Aetherworks decks, having a main deck card that can take care of it, sure, they get one activation out of it, but even still, I've seen, they either miss or they don't quite kill you, so having a chance to just take it seems pretty good in the main deck. That is also good in all other matchups.
Yeah, and they have like tireless trackers too. That helps if you can steal that so that they can't trade with your creatures, and now you have another creature. That helps you race a lot better. Again, taking Ishkana in that matchup is really good. So it really just pulls a lot of weight in a lot of matchups, which is the big draw to the card.
Now with blue, you also have Revolutionary Rebuff, a card I think like all of the decks touching blue at this point are starting to lean toward in just a way to fight Ishkana.
Yeah, so I was working with my friend Clay on this deck, and we were trying to find a good answer to Ishkana in game one because it's such a popular card. And I said, hey, we've been playing sideboard Revolutionary Rebuff. Why not try it in our main deck? It's fine against all the decks that aren't Green-Black Delirium that we think we're weak against. And then against Black-Green Delirium and against any Ishkana deck, it pulls a lot of weight. Even against Aetherworks Marvel, if they're casting Ishkana off the Marvel, or even Emrakul, because Emrakul's not an artifact, you can counter the thing that they're casting off the Marvel when they play it. And then it counters things like Avacyn's, which is the most important card for Flash against you.
Sure.
And it counters Gideon, which is their second most important card against you. It's just a really powerful main deck card that is not very often dead. And because of Servant, and because of just the way your creatures are costed, you're a lot of times able to play this game where you can still commit really relevant threats to the board and hold up a 2-mana counterspell. It's not that difficult. So it really shines in a lot of places.
Yeah. All right, now we'll move on to the sideboard here where you have, clearly you can kind of move these confiscation coups into whatever you need. You have a whole swath of counterspells between Ceremonious Rejection, Spell Shrivel, and more Revolutionary Rebuffs.
Yeah, so pretty much every matchup that matters that we are scared of has something you want to counter, and then this is sort of our way to have different counterspells for different matchups. So there's only one matchup where you bring in all of them, which is Aetherworks Marvel, because they have so many important things that you need to counter to win the matchup. But against Black-Green Delirium, you're super happy to have the extra rebuff in the Spell Shrivels. Against some of the more aggressive artifact-based decks, like vehicles, a couple copies of Ceremonious Rejection are really important. But for the most part, the counterspells are just concessions to Green-Black Delirium, where we want extra help post-board, and Aetherworks Marvel, where we just need to counter their important spells to be able to win the game.
And we got Natural State and Appetite to take care of all those pesky artifacts and enchantments.
Yep, pretty straightforward.
Plummet here for flying creatures. Then we got to touch on Jace, Unraveler's Secrets, and then the Boat, because you got one in the main deck and one in the sideboard.
Yeah, so Jace is an interesting card. I'll be honest, it's in there because we couldn't think of anything better. I'm not really sure it's the best, but it's fine against a lot of the more controlling matchups. The games, especially even like mirror matches too, the games get very grindy, and that's where Jace really shines. He can force them to waste energy by targeting Hydra. He can get annoying creatures out of the way against Green-Black Delirium, and then he can just draw you a lot of cards when the board gets kind of stalled, which happens a lot in this deck, because you can make a lot of little flyers and a lot of big ground creatures, so it becomes difficult for your opponent to make profitable attacks. And then the Skyship. I originally had 2 in the main deck. We decided for what we expected the metagame to be, we pulled back a little bit, but the card is amazing. It's so good against Blue-White Flash, because it's a way to kill their creatures, particularly Spell Queller, that can't be Spell Quellered.
Sure.
And it blocks Avacyn. It is a Gideon Slayer, does that really well, and it's an incredibly quick clock, which is why it's so good against the aggro decks too. It's a thing you can do that lets you get a clock on the board that will also give you effectively a removal spell every turn. It's a little weak against Unlicensed Disintegration because you waste some time crewing it and then you attack it, but even if they do that, you still got to kill a creature out of it, so it's not the worst exchange. But really it's just the fact that it's a 6/5 flyer that kills something every turn, so it allows you to turn the corner against the aggressive decks really well.
Yeah, this deck has a lot going on with it. When you were bringing this deck to the tournament, what was the metagame you were expecting, and what are you looking to prey on?
Yeah, so the metagame we were expecting was something like 30% Flash, 30% Delirium, like 10% vehicles, and then like 30% other stuff. And where this deck really shines is against those 3 decks that represent what we thought would be like 70% of the metagame. You crush Flash. It takes a lot of maneuvering. You really need to know how to play the matchup, and it takes a lot of practice. But I think if you have that practice, the matchup becomes very easy. Green-Black Delirium, I think, is a little better than 50%. Your game 1 is not the easiest. You generally need to draw a main deck rebuff or have a very aggressive draw and hope they don't play turn 5 Ishkana with Delirium.
Right.
But then post-board, especially when you have more counterspells and you can make your deck a little bit leaner, and you can board out like the bad, like Virtuosas and stuff that don't do a whole lot, the matchup becomes a lot better. And then the vehicles and other aggressive decks, you pretty much crush most of the time, as long as you mulligan aggressively. So we're pretty bad against everything else. I was lucky to beat Red-Green Marvel this round. We do board so many cards against it because that's the most common matchup that we think we're not good against. So we try to board like 7 or 8 cards against them. But yeah, we're basically trying to play on a metagame that's heavy on flash, delirium, and vehicles, which I think is kind of what everyone expects at this point.
All right, well, you're 3-1 through standard. Anything you like about the deck or want to change going forward?
There's not a whole lot I'd want to change. I would definitely want to try to figure out some of the more independent slots, like the third coup is kind of interchangeable. How many skyships in the main deck, whether you want 3 or 4 flows, a lot of these little things, but as far as the core of the deck, I'm incredibly happy with it, from everything down to how many basic lands of each type we're playing.
All right.
And I think the sideboard's really well built, so I would recommend this deck if you're running into a lot of Flash and Delirium decks and you need something that can cover both decks.
I think that's what everyone's looking for, and if this is the solution, I'm glad we have it, because you know, Delirium and Flash have taken over. People are like, what beats both decks? You seem pretty confident. Your record seems pretty good, so thanks for joining me here in the sideboard, AJ.
It's my pleasure.
Stay tuned to StarCityGames.com all week long for the action here in Atlanta.